Over the past 24 hours or so, I've had a little bit more free time on my hands, and I've just been in the mood to record a few random little unscripted videos about just some random topics. And this one is probably going to be the longest of them all. The others are quite short by comparison. So today I'm going to be talking about FLR, that's female led relationships. So when it comes to relationships and friendships for that matter, I'm actually emotionally, once I begin to trust, once I begin to connect with someone, I actually become a very giving person. And I like doing things for people, I like surprising people, I like leaving people in absolutely no doubt whatsoever that they mean something to me. I believe in showing people rather than just telling people. I do believe that I'm one of the few people I know who, and I don't mean to brag, but I'm one of the few people I know who means it when he says that actions speak louder than words. I actually do practice what I preach. I don't think many people do these days. I just like to give. I like to give. I may not be able to give much, but I like to give what I can. As much as I can. I like to sort of stretch myself. And I don't even mind giving more than the other person gives me. I'm not keeping a tally. I'm not going to demand, good deeds in return, like for like. And the only time I will ever sort of bring up something nice that I've done for someone as currency is when they've done the same thing to me, when they want me to do something, or I call them out for something, that they've done wrong, and they try and guilt trip me by bringing up something nice they did for me. I'm going to do the same in return. I'm going to reciprocate. I don't make the rules, but I will play by them. And like I say, I don't mind doing more for the other person than they do for me, providing people don't take the piss, and I end up being the only person doing anything, organising things, arranging things, because then I sort of begin to feel like I'm in a friendship or a relationship where really it's just me on my own. And it leads to situations like being taken for granted. They sort of get used to me being kind and doing nice things for them, and so it becomes the norm. And one day there's an argument and they bring up all the nice stuff they've done for me. I go and bring up some of the nice stuff I did for them, and their attitude is, well, why are you bringing that up? That's what you're supposed to do. That's just normal. There's also the tendency when you are the only person doing nice things and you get taken for granted that another person could come along who isn't normally like that, and they only have to do one thing, and because it's such a rare thing for them, that means more than all of the kindness that you've given yourself over the years, if that makes sense. A lot of friendships have ended up this way. Um, I do expect stuff in return, absolutely. But the things I want are just respect, courtesy, to be shown that I'm wanted, to be shown that I'm valued, to be shown that I've made a difference in someone's life, that someone has, if I wasn't in their life, things would be a lot more bleak for them, I suppose. I want to know what I've brought to someone's life. I want to know um, that I'm valued, really. I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I don't want to be worshipped. But at the very least, the very least I will accept is the position of possession. I will, at a push, if someone can't muster the respect to treat me like a human being, then I'll take the title of possession, but I want to be a prized one rather than a disposable one. The only problem is that there are a lot of women these days, and a lot of guys too, actually, but I'm focusing on women here because FLR, who have this sort of attitude where they want perfection in their male partners. They want men who look perfect all of the time, tick so many boxes, and you can tick, they can have 100 things that they want from you, and you can tick 99 of them. But if you fail to tick one, then you're a bad man. But yet, if a guy, in particular a guy like me, has a few standards, just a few little tiny standards, he's somehow entitled, he's somehow demanding. So a lot of people, a lot of men and women, would probably see these preferences of mine in how I'd like to be treated as a form of entitlement, and would have me down as a bad person for just wanting to be treated like a decent human being. Fine, that's their opinion. I'm not gonna agree with it. I think that what I want from a relationship or a friendship should be the breadline. It should be the bottom line. Because to accept anything less is to essentially accept an abusive relationship or an abusive friendship, or at least a neglectful one. So the first time I was introduced to the concept of FLR, the first time I heard the term female-led relationship, was probably around about 2009. I used to have this friend, and she identified as a feminist. But she was really one of the most principled people I've ever known. And she was a little bit older than me. Well, I say that, she would have been about 40 now, I think. And she was very, I'd say I would classify her more as a gender egalitarian than a feminist, but she wouldn't have that. She used the term feminist with pride. And her advice was that if I'm ever offered an FLR, to run away as fast as I can and keep on running. So obviously, and I do have a theory as to why something from her personal life, why I think that she said that to me, why she had what seemed to be almost a revulsion to FLR. But I'll explain that later, or maybe in another video, I don't know. But over the years, I heard that term a little bit more, and I would think about it from time to time. And initially I thought that FLR was like a traditional nuclear family, but where the woman goes out and works and the man stays at home and does becomes a house husband, which isn't for me, doesn't appeal to me. I don't think that house husbands should be stigmatised. When a woman stays at home and the man goes to work, housework is the most difficult job in the world. If the fortunes are reversed and she ends up going to work and he ends up staying at home, going to work is now the most difficult thing on the planet. I just think that house husbands shouldn't be stigmatised, but on that same token, being a house husband just isn't something that suits me. It's not something that I really want to aspire to be. It's just a personal preference. As I got a little bit older, I came to the conclusion that an FLR could just be a relationship of any kind of makeup, but where the woman just happens to be the dominant partner. It's very rare, I don't know if it's even possible at all, to have a relationship where both partners are equal. One is always going to be more dominant than the other. And I suppose you could be a man in a relationship where you're the dominant partner, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If some women like the man to take charge. But then he leaves her, goes for a woman that's a lot more dominant than him. He's now in an FLR relationship. That was sort of my thinking. Over the years, I've sort of, on occasion, done a little bit of looking into the topic of FLR. I'm a naturally curious person, and I've looked at blogs, I've looked at articles about it, and I've come to the realisation that there are sort of three common types of female-led relationship. So the first kind is probably the one that came to a lot of people's minds, assuming how sexual they are. I know it came to mine. and that is the kink, the fetish, the femdom variety of FLR. I think at some point, anyone who's used her for long enough will at some point in their news feed see a clip of some couple in some public place like Trafalgar Square wearing latex, and she's riding him like a pony or she's whipping him. And all I can say is, hats off to people like that. I'm into some strange things myself. I think we all are. But even then, it's still quite a big thing for me to admit that. So for these people to have the confidence to go out and do stuff like that for pleasure is something I admire, and I really am happy for these people that they've met each other, that they've found someone with a similar interest to them, and it just works so well. Massive respect. The second kind, though, I don't really have much respect for. Although, to be fair, and I'm going to focus on the FLR equivalent, but I have seen this with the genders reversed. And I've noticed it a lot in age gap relationships of more than 15 years. But it's relationships where the woman is so in charge. She's basically the man's parent. I think it's unfair for someone to enter into a relationship unbeknownst that they're essentially adopting someone and are now going to be expected to raise them. And I just can't see how the other partner, the child, can grow. How can they grow as a person when they're not being encouraged to? One of the important things about, I was going to say relationships, but also friendships as well, for me, is I like what I can learn from. I like the fact that I can learn from a good friendship or a good relationship. But how do you learn when you're basically a child? Don't get me wrong, everybody at some point reverts to childhood very briefly. You know, we want our partner to sort of temporarily, briefly, sort of baby us a little bit. You know, not even in a kink way, I mean like in an emotional way. Well, obviously in some relationships, sure. We all do it, and we all at some point become the responsible person in any kind of duality. But not all the time. So that kind of FLR isn't really for me. So the first type, and probably the first thing that popped into most people's minds when I mentioned FLR, is the kink, fetish, femdom variety. So anyone who's used Twitter long enough and has sufficient enough followers has probably at some point seen a video come up in their feed, or has probably gone looking for content like this, where there's a video of a couple wearing spandex, wearing latex, in a public place like Trafalgar Square, and she's whipping him or she's riding him like a horse. And all I can say to people like that is good on you. Seriously, my hat is off to you. I'm into some weird stuff myself. I think we all are. But for me to even say that on camera was quite a big thing for me to admit. So I have a lot of respect for people that have the confidence to go out there and explore these types of things for fun, for amusement. I just respect their courage. We live in a very judgmental society, and good on them also for finding someone that they can share such a deep thing with in absolute comfort. I have a lot of respect for people that can do that sort of thing. But the second variety of FLR is one that I don't have a lot of respect for, and certainly doesn't appeal to me. It's the type where the woman becomes such a leader, such a ruler, such a domineering presence, that she basically becomes the man's parent. Now, I've seen the reverse of this. I've seen men having to become de facto parents to women. Um, and I've seen this, it's actually quite common in my experience, in my anecdotal experience, in relationships where there's an age gap of more than, I'd say about 15 years. But I'm going to focus on the FLR version of that. And I just couldn't thrive in a relationship like that. First of all, it's not fair on the partner who thought she was getting a boyfriend or a husband, maybe, only to find out that she's essentially adopted a child. And I don't know how I would grow in a relationship like that. One of the important things for me, one of the most joyous things for me when it comes to relationships, friendships, is the opportunity to learn and to grow as a person. I just can't see that happening in a relationship where I'm sort of babied. Now, don't get me wrong, at some point, everybody in any kind of relationship wants to just sort of be looked after that way, just for like a few minutes. You know, we want to cry and we want to hug. Not me personally, I'm a tough guy, but everyone else. And at some point, you know, we all behave immature sometimes, and so the other person, I think we've all at some point had to be the sort of responsible adult, really. But to live like that 24/7, you know, I don't want to be anyone's child, and I don't want to be anyone's parent. So that kind of FLR, not really my thing. So the third type of FLR, and in my sort of casual research, reading articles, reading blogs, talking to people, this seems to be the most common one. And it's been described to me many a time in this sort of way. So the man is still the man. He still works. He still provides. But he's also submissive. He'll do nice things. He'll do romantic things. He'll help out with the housework. He'll help look after the kids. And he puts his woman on a pedestal. Now, when I hear this one, my mind automatically wonders, isn't this just like a normal relationship but with an FLR clause? Sort of similar but not the same to feminist types who want gender equality, they love gender equality, but then as soon as they find a traditional gender role that they absolutely love, that can actually benefit them, suddenly they're traditional. And suddenly they don't hate gender roles. Sort of like that sort of have your cake and eat it too narrative. You know, I want my boyfriend to be submissive today, but tomorrow I want him to be a traditional man. The funny thing is, though, if you were to force me at gunpoint to enter into an FLR, that's actually the type that I would be quite suited to, simply by my own nature. All that stuff I said at the start about how I am in friendships and relationships, I'm a very giving person, and that I put people on a pedestal, but don't really expect worship myself. I just want to be treated like a human fucking being, a valued human being. That kind of goes very well. It fits almost like a jigsaw into that kind of FLR. Especially the bit about putting someone on a pedestal, because I am such a closed person, such a guarded person, that when someone comes into my life who I feel comfortable with, they're usually a very special person to me. It takes a very special person to get me to be that way. So special that worship is my sort of default mode. So I think that kind of relationship would suit me down to the ground. I have no problem with entering into that kind of female-led relationship. So I've decided to come up here because the lighting's better, even though that spot is now much shinier and visible. So that kind of relationship would suit me, providing I got something in return. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with getting something in return in any kind of partnership that you're involved in. But unfortunately, a lot of people these days, and I am going to gender this, even though this again isn't a gendered problem because this is an FLR video, there are lots of women who expect to be able to do nothing for the praise and worship and adoration that they expect from other people. So an example would be women who expect to be praised simply for being women, in particular for being attractive women. I just find people who get by on looks, while they're stunningly gorgeous and absolutely wonderful to look at, I always find them generally a bit plain in the personality department and a little bit boring, probably because they've never had to really work on their personality in the same way that an ugly person does. Case in point, I don't consider women over 40 to be old, and most of them, in my opinion, are breathtakingly attractive. But a lot of women at that sort of age group now see themselves as unattractive and old and start to notice the lack of attention that they once had, generally because they were once breathtakingly stunning young people who had no end of worshippers and desire from the opposite sex and all the privileges that come with being an attractive person. But now they're losing all of that, or they perceive themselves as losing all of that. They become resentful. You see social media posts, articles, blogs women complaining about lack of male attention that they once had, almost like they feel they're entitled to it. I can't help but feel if we reverse the genders, we'd be calling these women incels for having that kind of entitlement. But I do have some empathy for them, to be treated, to be put on such a high pedestal, and then to suddenly find that the thing that got you there isn't as it was. I can imagine that can be quite painful, but there is a limit to my sympathy, because there are those of us who never even had that. We never had that moment where we were put on the pedestal. Some of us have to go through life looking like this. This is probably my peak. It's probably all downhill from here. So I don't really have a lot of sympathy, although I do have empathy for people who once had, so much privilege because of their physical appearance, but now finding themselves losing that privilege. But at the end of the day, that's when you work on your personality. So I wouldn't worship someone just because they're physically desirable and they feel they're entitled to worship based on that. Further along the road, you get to the women who expect to be worshipped because of their difficult past. Now, this is a slightly more complex one to explain, because I actually do look at people's personalities, and I consider people who have lived, who have suffered, but survived that suffering. They have emotional scars that demonstrate their resilience and their strength. I consider people like this to be very attractive, and I think it's quite a commonplace thing. In fact, I mentioned earlier that I had my feminist friend back in 2009. One time I got really drunk and I ended up opening up to her about things I've not told anybody else. There's actually one specific thing about me that by this point had been part of my history for about 10 years by this point. And to date, she's the second person to know about that. And I'm not going to say that's the last time I would ever open up that deep. But I do think like the next time I do it will have to be with someone that I really trust and someone I've known for quite a long time. And also the mood would have to be right, the setting would have to be right. And the stars would have to align. But nonetheless, I got completely Oliver Twist and I spilled my guts to her. And she said that it actually made me, knowing all that stuff about me, made me more interesting to her. It made, apparently it made her more protective of me. And it made me more interesting. And, but above all else, she said that it made me more attractive to her. Now, we never ended up together, but she said that apparently that was an attractive thing, that I'd sort of survived all of that, and not even in a purely sexual way. She wasn't sort of trying to fetishize me or sexualize my past. So I completely agree, and I do consider people that have survived difficult things to be strong people, and I am attracted to strong people. But there are people who expect to be able to live off of past struggles. They feel as though it's almost like they feel as though the world owes them something because they've suffered. And I find people like this usually act as though they're the only people in the world who have that kind of past, and it's almost like you end up becoming. They expect their partners that they end up with to become almost like secondary characters in the life story that is their life. Whereas I've always believed that a relationship should be about two people. I've also noticed a trend of people that have been consistently hurt by people from the same demographic. An example would be from the same gender. Women that have been continually hurt and let down by men, men that have been continually hurt and let down by women. And so as a result become almost like they expect their latest boyfriend or girlfriend to pay for the mistakes of their fellow gender. This is actually a common thing, and obviously as a society we sort of stigmatise men who have resentment towards women because of what women have done to them in their past, while okaying and even glamorising the reverse of that. And you might say, well, that's because women typically go through more at the hands of men than men do at the hands of women. But I don't think that's really an appropriate thing to say. I think if a guy has trust issues because of women in his past, you can't really expect him to switch off that part of his brain that makes him cautious. Judging an entire gender by the mistakes of a few is very irrational. But we're an irrational species, so it's perfectly understandable to be cautious. And I've been this way myself. I've, used my past I've sort of lived off of my past and used that to justify my shitty behaviour in the present, what would have been the present. Until I realised, of course, that I'm letting the bad experiences of my past rule my life now, and control me. I think if you're, let's just say, for example here, a man and you're dating a woman who has been hurt by men in the past, I think that you should be wary about that. You should be mindful of that. You must never, if you ever make a mistake that reminds her of something that someone else did in her past, then you must learn from it and never do it again. I've made such mistakes. People have also made those kinds of mistakes with me, reminded me of my past, completely unintentionally. Just, be careful. Just be understanding and be very, very mindful. One of the greatest things is to learn about someone, especially someone with such an interesting and diverse past. And one of the things that this is useful for, learning about people, is learning how not to behave around them, learning the things that hurt them in their past, and aiming to be different to the people that cause that pain. But the one thing no one must ever do is consent to pay on behalf of other people who did things to this person before you even knew them. It's one thing, and a completely respectable thing, to want to be the change in someone's life. One of the nicest things that anyone ever said about me, until I found out they were saying this to everyone else, was, I've been through so much trauma, George, but surviving that was worth it because I met you. It's great to be that person, but never be the type of person that pays for the mistakes of other people. And I do wonder, if I was in an FLR or any kind of relationship with someone who essentially lived off of their past traumas, I'd wonder if that would end up being what the role I would fill. Basically, she's been hurt by men all her life, I'm the man that's got to pay for it. And that's just not really healthy, in my opinion. But I do stress that a woman with a difficult past doesn't put me off. In fact, the fact she survived it really adds to it for me. A woman isn't interesting to me. A man or woman isn't interesting to me if they don't have those imperfections, those flaws, those delicate moments, those vulnerabilities. And I suppose a woman worthy of the type of worship that I just naturally give when someone is that meaningful to me would be a goddess. But a goddess isn't someone that's just worshipped because she's beautiful or because she exists. She's worshipped for what she provides. A goddess gives. And not only that, but she gives consistently, every now and again. She doesn't just give for a while and then says, right, that's it. That's all I'm giving now. You now owe me for the rest of your life. This is my currency that I'm going to hold over you. But unfortunately, in this day and age, a lot of people, male and female, want to be able to reap the benefits but not put in any of the work. I'm going to pose a scenario now, and this goes out to anyone watching this, male or female. Let's just say that I run a dating agency, like an old-fashioned computer dating agency from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you come into my shop looking for that special someone, and I say to you that you're in luck because there's someone over there right now who I think is a good match for you. This person is so amazing, so wonderful, that the simple fact that they would let you breathe the same air as them, that's their contribution to your relationship. That's something that you now owe them for the rest of your life, for the rest of your time together. And she doesn't have to do anything else, but if she does, then you owe her for that as well. However, for you, it's not that simple. You're not as important as them. So the simple fact that you've consented to be in a relationship with them, that's not enough to guarantee any kind of respect. You have to do everything from now on, and even when every chore, everything, and even then you're not owed anything, because that's your job. You are for them, but they're not for you. Would you enter into a relationship on that basis? I don't think I would. I could see a relationship like that turning quite emotionally damaging and, dare I say it, quite abusive. I would imagine a setup where I would be doing all of the chores, all of the romantic gestures, everything, because it's my role. That's my purpose. Meaning that first of all, she would end up taking it for granted, which means that one day we'll have an argument where she'll bring up the one or two nice things that she's done for me, expecting me to be overwhelmed with that. But yet when I bring up the mountains of things I've done for her, it's just dismissed. It's just met with a flat expression and oh, I didn't think you were counting those. Or you end up with a situation where very soon, when it comes to romantic gestures, the well of ideas dries up and you run out of things to do. You run out of things to impress her, meaning that she could end up getting bored with you and you end up being replaced. Which in turn leads to a relationship where you're constantly on edge, wondering how long it's going to be before you're disposed of. You feel like a guest in your own home and in your own relationship. You know, if your relationship was a country, she'd be the citizen, you'd be the person on a visa that can be revoked at any time. I wouldn't feel loved in something like that. And, you know, I think that really pushes the boundaries of, well, that's just her keeping you on your toes, or that's her treating you mean and keeping you keen, or any other kind of mind games that we would class as emotional abuse if we reverse the genders. I just wouldn't feel happy. And there's also a tendency to become so under the thumb that I would essentially end up becoming like her child. You know, I'd have no, you know, she would be like my mum, you know, which I've discussed before. And there's also an equal possibility that the reverse could happen, that she can end up becoming so spoilt and so pampered that I end up becoming like her dad. You know, that just doesn't excite me, that just doesn't interest me. That sounds more like an emotionally empty and abusive relationship with FLR attached to it to make it sound passable. But the other kind, the kind that's the one I said was most common, in at least when I've done sort of some reading up on this topic, but based in love and genuine affection with someone that wants me for me, that wants to give love to me and never take it back, who isn't afraid to tell me that she loves me and cares about me, despite what other people may think, and against all odds. That is something I could easily, I would like something like, I would definitely be open for that kind of thing. And the funny thing is as well, is I actually have views, opinions, that would actually suit that kind of dynamic as well. The sort of views that if I was to one day make a separate video, anyone where I outline these views, anyone who's seen some of my videos before or has access to my minds.com account, they would probably find these views to be quite contradictory to the general topics that I talk about, until I sat down and explained it all and balanced it all up, and then they'd realise actually that they're not as contradictory as we thought. So I do think an FLR is something that I'm open to, you know, with the right person. That kind of dynamic. So I've been planning to talk about this for a long time, and I haven't prepared a script for it, hence all the umming and ahhing and why it's gone on longer than it should do. In fact, all of the videos I've posted this week have been on that format. But I'm sure there's going to be stuff that I've missed. So if I do miss anything out, if I realise later, shit, I missed something out, what I'll do is I'll do a follow-up video and I'll put the link to that in the description below. I also want to make. I mentioned earlier that I had a feminist friend who was against FLR, or at least the term FLR, and I also mentioned I had a theory as to why that may be. I'm going to record a separate video about her. I've met some interesting people down the years, and I do like making little videos just sort of talking about them, you know, the people that have fascinated me. So I'll go and do that. And when I do, I will post a link to that in the description below as well. But for now, I want to just bring this video to a close and thank anyone who watched.